So it's a critical theory class, and we're talking about how to read a video game. This is ultimately very, very important over the coming years if you want to keep looking at critical theory and stuff and critical literature, because video games ultimately are now a form of literature. Video games are story-based usually, they are narrative, they are interactive. Everything that we have learned in this class could be applied just as easily to video games as they are to Heart of Darkness, which we've been looking at. The only difference is that video games are a relatively new medium. Gaming itself is as old as time, like play and playing is a magnificent thing, like animals play. So this thing like goes beyond human beings. However, video games itself are still 40 years old. Yeah, 40 years old. That's actually Ralph Baer. He's the man who created the first video game console, the Magnavox Odyssey, in 1972. He's 91 years old right now and still alive, so he's getting ancient. Awesome. Okay, if you want to sneak around. However, video games don't necessarily get the same respect as everything else, like poems or books or music or film, because they're still relatively new. We don't know how to, look at this medium. We're still definitely coming up with our critical video game vocabulary, and how exactly do we look at these things and critique them? And honestly, that's kind of been the same issue with all media. Like, nobody liked rock and roll when it came out. It was corrupting the youth of society. Even Plato didn't think oral tradition was as proper a medium as, old, written histories. Like, he hated the fact that people were just speaking the Odyssey instead of reading the books themselves and passing them orally. And like I said, as English majors, it's important for us to know how exactly do we look at video games and what is the cool thing about video games, because these things are only going to get bigger. Like, they're currently the most successful and most profitable entertainment medium around today. Video games, as I've said, are literary. What exactly does that mean? Games are literary, but they are different in terms of literature. And the biggest problem or thing about that, I shouldn't say problem, is that they're interactive. As a player, when you play a video game, you are all of a sudden the most important agent in that storytelling process, which makes it kind of a strange thing to critique and look at, the way we have with books and stuff, where Marlowe is going to do what Marlowe does in Heart of Darkness no matter what happens. In Legend of Zelda, right here, if Link dies 30 seconds in, game over, that's the end, you have to start all over. Video games are astounding in that way because when you die, you have to start over, and it requires a lot of human being interaction to go into that. And all of these things all have fantastic stories and different elements of just literary feel. Braid right here is a game that kind of mimics the Super Mario Brothers story to talk about like the main character who made a mistake, and he's able to rewrite time in sort of these interesting ways, but not like correct this one dire mistake that he made. And at the end, the game ends with a flash and a quote about the atomic bomb.
Say that again about the mistake.
He just sort of made this great mistake, and the entire story and all the written word in the game is definitely alluding to this thing that he just can't fix, despite the fact that through the game you are going back in time and going forward in time to try to get through the levels.
Why can't you fix the mistake?
Because it's sort of the plot device that catalyzes the entire process.
I see.
And then we've got Flower right here, which is a PlayStation game where you play as the wind. You're actually just blowing flowers around, and it's become a beautiful, almost just greeting card kind of feeling of serenity as you play. Because it's blissful, there's nothing trying to kill you. It's just you play as if you hold a button and you just move the controller left and right, and it just goes with you. Then we got some of the more story-based games. We've got Shadow of the Colossus, where you're trying to save a princess by defeating 12 colossi, which are just these ginormous beings. And ultimately you realize at the end of the game that these ginormous, colossal beings are actually kind of guardians of the entire planet, and you destroyed everything. But you did it to save a girl. And with that whole saving a girl kind of princess concept, we have Final Fantasy. And Final Fantasy, like the first game, is almost a marvel in its storytelling approach, because as it says right there, the game was made in 1987 by Squaresoft. And Final Fantasy, before then, like the biggest games around were like Dragon Quest, where you were going off to fight a dragon and save the princess. Or Super Mario Brothers, where you were going off fighting a giant turtle and then saving the princess. In Final Fantasy, the first thing you do is you go up to a castle and you talk to a king and he says, "Hey, my princess has been captured by this guy, please save her." So after about 3 hours, you fight some imps, you get to the bad guy's castle, his name is Garland, or the bad guy, his name is Garland. He fights you, you beat him, and then you save the princess. And the king says, "Thank you very much. In honor of your good deeds, we built a bridge." Normally in other games, this is where the credits roll and the game is over. But as you walk just a little north till you get to the bridge, the screen blacks out and you get this image right here. And there's a rolling screen that talks about it. Now the light warriors are going off to save the world, and they will see things that they could not believe, and their journey begins. In terms of a literary device or a literary story, gamers at this point had really only been saving the princess. And Final Fantasy is saying, yes, you saved the princess, but there is so much more to this game than that. Video games are interactive. And this is probably one of the most important parts of games because it's what differentiates games from any other medium. Because with books, and the definition of interactivity that I like comes from Chris Crawford, which is a cyclic process between two or more agents in which each agent ultimately listens, thinks, and speaks. This is the foundation of communication, but more importantly, it is the foundation of video games and interactivity because, as far as other mediums go, novels are not interactive. You can read them, you can engage them, but no matter what you do, a game will never change, or a book will never change. A book will never listen to you. A book will never respond to you. Its responses will be the same for everything. Same with movies. We are looking, we are engaging. There may be some winking to the audience, but it will never, ever look back. Games, however, everything that responds in a good interactive game is listening to you completely. Really, great sex is great interaction, because when you have good sex, you are thinking, you are listening, you are responding, and that just leads to a very fun time. So really, games are pretty much sex. If you get anything, think about that. It's just poetic sex. Okay. And now we're back to, what are the greatest things that games can do? And the greatest things that we have seen from games, beyond just the stories, is that they provide a wonderful sense of worldliness and liveliness and safety. And I use the word safety because you can do anything in a game, and it's not going to hurt you. You can all of a sudden learn how to do these things and how to, build a farm, not necessarily a farm build, but you can learn how exactly does farming work in the context of a game, and it won't hurt anybody. In World of Warcraft, you will be fighting dragons and teaming up with thousands of people, hundreds of people. And through that game, you will learn teamwork, you will learn how to cooperate with others. And at the end of the day, you just lost a couple hours. This is why there are games being worked on by the military to help teach things. I was talking to people from Santa Cruz who are currently working with DARPA, the Defense Initiative people. And they're working on a game to help teach cultural sensitivity for soldiers who are meeting with, people in other nations, So you can all of a sudden just stand, and the game actually has a camera that will read your body motions to make sure you're not doing anything that's offensive to them in a region. And that's astounding, because all of a sudden there is no consequence for that, and yet we can learn these things. And then there's things like Fallout here, where really you just are dropped in a space, and you can just meet things and interact with them, and really become attached to this world with just over the course of several hours. However, games are fantastic, but there's also a lot of trouble with them as a medium. And one of these troubles is that games are really hard. Every game ultimately requires a different sort of way to interact with the space. Every game has a different set of controls. You may get really used to being able to push the A button to jump in Mario, but in a different game, that may be something else. And that is going to stop you from getting really immersed in this environment and to really learn how to deal with these things. Another thing is that video games, unlike any book, movie, TV show, it gets harder to play a game as it does, or the more you get into it. I've had fun described as just a series of increasing challenges, but that means that at some point you're going to get to a challenging wall that you can't surpass. And that's going to get really frustrating when you just want to see the last chapter of that book. No other medium does that, and that's really important to know. Also, one of the things that is stopping video games as a real literary form and a real challenging form is that people just want to have fun, which fun is delightful. Everybody wants to chill out, just play a couple games of Halo, and go home. But there are a lot of people really, really aggressive about the fact that games should be fun. And games should be fun. But we've read Heart of Darkness. None of us here would call it a fun book. A challenging book, an interesting book, a compelling book, an engaging book. We would never call it fun just due to the subject matter. We would never call Apocalypse Now fun. We would never call Schindler's List fun. We'd call Jurassic Park fun, though, which Jurassic Park is a very fun movie. People really just want the Jurassic Park of games and not anything more, which is great because you want to have that fun, but it means that as a video game movement, we are only now starting to really see what we can do beyond fun. And the games that I'll be showing later, I don't think I would describe as fun. And with that, I forgot to make this point earlier, but as English majors, it's really important to know that games don't have to be fun, because games are now really easy to make. There was a book out there that actually talks about how, like, soccer moms and stuff were making games in their free time are really changing this medium. Because all of a sudden, how the printing press and the typewriter made it really easy to publish words, we can now make games without coding and without any programming basis, which means that anybody here can make a game after just kind of 2 days of playing around. Which means we can get really new, exciting prospects and ideas that we can then later on see going on. Okay. What all games need, and what is probably the most important part of games, which is why I made this slide, is that you need to make an engaging experience. What a good game does is really takes players, if a game doesn't have to be fun, it needs to be engaging. It needs to take players and really show them something they haven't seen. They need to show something that is compelling to get people from point A to point B, to want to keep going in. And what I have here are just 2 pictures of people playing Dungeons and Dragons, which is probably both the most elegant game ever made, and probably the most engaging game, because really what it is just 4 or 5 people sitting at a table listening to one person speak. And they will say, the Dungeon Master, who's the keeper of the rules and the general theming and the idea for the story, but they are not actually the author of the story. If somebody says, or if the Dungeon Master says, okay, this dwarf came in and he's telling you, hey, please save my sister, she got kidnapped by goblins in a mine. Any player plan can be like, you know what, fuck that, we are going to go stab the dwarf and go to Disneyland. And the Dungeon Master all of a sudden has to somehow guide that experience to anything. Every player has just as much agency as anything else, and that makes for some really exciting and engaging experiences. You want to be taken on a place from point A to point B in ways that you may not have been otherwise. Without player engagement, game over. Nobody cares, the game will be turned off, and therefore you need to try to figure out what exactly is engaging about the games you're playing. And if it's not engaging, turn it off. And as an authorial experience, you could probably write a good couple papers about why you turned off video games. I've read a lot. Okay, so again, how do you make engaging games? It's really about looking at the game mechanics as some sort of metaphor. And what I mean by game mechanics is the rules and the universe that's put in. The rules for a game would be, go from point A to point B. The mechanics would be the way in which you do that. And if you're trying to create, an engaging and narrative piece of technology, or a narrative, entertainment product, you want to make sure that everything sort of works towards a cohesive measure, which is the metaphor of everything. People have played a lot of games and don't think it's fun, but if you're able to, make sort of the interaction, Mario jumping, an interesting sense of, what exactly does that mean about the world and what is that saying about the character, you can do so much. We read poetry and novels, we look at lines of text, we've read about, the Buddha and the lotus flower and what that means to death. We can actually do the same about games, just as they kind of joke about here in Ski Free that, the monsters always come and get you until they realize that you don't have to. But until then, the monster's always going to come and get you. And even then, with that ability to push F, like you have this one perception, and now it's changed because you know something more about how exactly this world works, the universe of Ski Free. Okay, now we're going to go play a game quickly. This game probably is the best example of game mechanics as a metaphor. I think it is a delightful experience. It takes maybe 3 minutes to play, which is why I'm using it for class. So if anybody would like to volunteer to play this, come on up and okay, Audra. Wonderful. Okay, I actually forgot to cue it up, so give me just a second. But the game, computer freezes. That's not a part of the game. There we go. I'll edit this out in my grad school video.
Oh, am I totally just like in
Oh, I am. No, it's a wait. Okay. Okay, so the only buttons you'll need are the arrow keys.
Yay! I'm good at those games.
Yes. Okay,
Okay.
so just come over here.
Okay.
Yeah, just the arrow keys on the computer. And then click to start.
Oh, what am I supposed to do?
Just look.
Oh. Am I supposed to hit those, right?
Just look.
Just like. This is so fun. This music is really sentimental.
The game is called Loneliness.
The game is called what?
Loneliness.
Oh. You want to stay lonely? You don't want to join them?
This is what Audra's doing.
Oh, they won't let me touch them?
Oh, they won't let you.
Will they let me touch them?
Okay. Oh, you did.
That's so sad. This is sad. Wait, are you gonna talk about emotional responses? Oh my god, we're getting dark here. We're coming to the heart of darkness.
Alex, how do you lose or win this game?
There is no win or lose conditions to this game.
Yeah,
Oh.
it's just on the end. You just play.
I can barely see. I can't see now. Is it gonna get lighter? I can barely
And
see.
you'll know when the game ends.
You're swallowed by the black hole. What's OECD?
Aww.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this is cool.
This is
Thank
not
you.
game.
Yeah,
So this is a not game.
Yeah, this came from a movement that is kind of developing, which they call not games, which are attempting to be games that don't necessarily follow the sort of the forced rule structure that we see in other games. There is no victory conditions. This
Okay,
is a
no
game
win or
made
lose. You just
purely
keep
to
playing.
make you feel sort of empathetical towards understanding
I
loneliness.
see.
And what we saw was actually some really interesting things about the way Audra played.
Mhm.
Is that she didn't necessarily see that the game was called Loneliness. She didn't necessarily know how to
Right.
interpret the music.
Uh-huh.
She just thought it was lonely, just kind of meandering around until she started to clue in that she
Oh,
couldn't touch the
okay.
other figures.
I see.
And I think mentally we all sort of looked at those little squares and we just started to interpret them as people walking away from you. That's definitely astounding when we think about the fact that just with that music, with just that little bit of music, it's a very simple game. It's just squares on a white background. But when we get close, we see them walk away. We realize what it's kind of like to be lonely and to not be able to go out and connect with anything. And through the message at the end, you realize that this is an issue that is worth considering. And we were able to touch on it in a way that I don't think movies are able to, because we're still seeing somebody and we know that the camera's ending. This way we are able to feel as an agent in this world, unable to do something.
Right.
Which in terms of loneliness, the answer is be less lonely, go talk to people, but in some cases you need to feel that powerlessness that the game is able to restrict you from. And powerlessness is actually an interesting subject that I'm going to talk about now, because video games, the successful ones mostly, are about power. They're making you feel strong, they're making you feel accomplished, they're making you feel like you can win and you can do anything. They're definitely power fantasies, which is what you want to do. Like you've had a long day at work, you want to come home, you want to feel like you can jump 3,000 feet tall and punch aliens. Now we're going to talk about a different kind of game. And this is a board game. There's only one copy of this in the world, and it's called Train. It's made by Brenda Brathwaite Romero. She calls it, according to a lecture I heard from her a month ago, she called it a game of compliance. And I played this game 3 months ago, and I don't think I will ever want to play a game like this again. But it was probably the most important game I will ever play. So the game is called Train. Train is a game made by Brenda Romero, and she made this in her garage, just sort of after being artistically inspired to do something. In the game, players start by throwing these train cars, so these things, just right here, somewhere right here, with the little yellow figures. Players can then start moving the train cars down the path. And that's all done by just rolling the die. Players can also pick up some cards these cards right here, that sort of let you derail other cars and make your car move faster. And once you get to the end of the road, you unload the train car and you get money for it. You're also given a terminus card, which I don't see on the map. Once you take all the figures out, you flip over the terminus card and you learn where exactly those figures went that you were putting them down. And you realize that they were all concentration camps. This game is about the Holocaust. And it is by far the most powerful game I think I will ever have an opportunity to play. Okay. Train is probably the most powerful example of what games can do, and using the entire game mechanics and the entire game system as a metaphor for what is it trying to do. And Brenda Romero did amazing things in the development of this. I'm going to go back a slide. Because she even, to show the import of this game, everything in this game is packed as a metaphor. Like the shattered glass windows, the yellow pieces, all of these are actually heavy Jewish symbolism that shows what's going on. And Brenda, like I said, she called this a game about compliance. And, to show what she was doing, this right here is a World War II era Nazi typewriter. I've seen it. There was a shift click to use the Secret Service logo. She wrote the rules on a Nazi typewriter. And she said at this lecture, the people that play games tend to blindly follow rules. Will they blindly follow the rules that come out of a Nazi typewriter? Mm-hmm. And I played the game knowing what it was, and I still generally did. I still followed the rules just to see what this experience was like. But even worse is that the rules that she wrote, there are a lot of sort of gaps and holes, poor development things, that you then talk to the other players and try to figure out, well, what do we want to do with this? Almost to make us question these things, but we still ultimately follow the rules and what's going on, which is incredible. Like I said, I played this game 3 months ago, and I immediately went back to my hotel room, because I was in San Francisco at the time, and just sat quietly. I don't think there will ever be another game like this, but Brenda is actually working on a series with UC Santa Cruz to create 6 other games about the worst catastrophes in human existence. Her office at Santa Cruz actually has 50,000 brown painted figures to represent each Native American that was forced to walk the Trail of Tears. And she's working on a game to explore that concept. But the typewriter, there was a typewriter on my kitchen table. My roommate owns it. She's over there. And I actually take it off the table during when I play game nights on Saturday, because that metaphor is so powerful at this point that I just cannot focus on a game knowing that there's a typewriter on the table. But this game has done sort of amazing things. She actually did manage to show this game to a really respected rabbi in the Jewish community who blessed it and called it a work of Torah just due to the impact it had on everybody. And I never want to play this game again despite how amazing and powerful it was. And I show this because there is only one of these in the world. She is not selling it. She made this as a work of art to show something. It goes to museums. She's watched every game except maybe one that has ever been played. And it is a very important just artifact of what games can do in game history. And this was made 2-3 years ago. It's still being played. So there's a lot of just really impactful game history that's happening right now. Now we're going to talk about Spec Ops.
Well, I guess I want to understand this a little better. So she has only one game that's actually physically made?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it is a board game.
Yeah,
So.
So do you have to like sign up to play that game? Is it, like,
It sort of, it tours around, and then you just
Tours?
show up to play it. Like, I played it at the Game Developers Conference,
Okay.
where it was on a table, and you could just walk up and play it when nobody else was, and kind of get people together and have these experiences. And that's kind of how it goes around. I think it's actually at the UC Santa Cruz right now, and students can play it when they're there.
Kind of like just interactive artwork.
interactive artwork?
Yeah. But she actually did give it to art museums, and they were kind of confused about letting people play it. And she really had to encourage that, no, you can't touch this artwork. It is meant to be interactive. And there's actually a rule in the game that, at the end of the game, if you want, you can smash the glass. And she's actually wondered what will happen when the glass gets smashed beyond repair. And that part of the game is lost, but she actually doesn't have that many people willingly smash the glass. There's a camera there. So now we're going to talk about Spec Ops, which I'm actually sorry to say is just as depressing. Because Spec Ops The Line is still based around Heart of Darkness, it definitely follows a similar plot structure, but is talking about very, very different things than Heart of Darkness exactly is. And before I talk about it, I want to make sure that you guys know that games are not always this depressing. Games are fantastic. There are wonderfully happy examples, like I showed Flower earlier, just a picture of it. Because you play as the wind, and it's serene, and it's really impactful. And about 80% into the game, it becomes nighttime and there's thunderbolts, and you just feel really emotionally pulled. But once you finish the game and it becomes sunlight, you just feel so happy. It is a great feeling, and games are a lot of fun. They are not as depressing as the joke I'm showing you.
What's the name of that farming game?
Farmville.
Farmville.
Which was on Facebook. It was a Facebook game that got some 11 million players. No, 50-something million players, I think. And it's mostly manipulation. I'm not going to lie about that. It is purely just showing you human beings that, hey, if you push a button and every so often you get candy, you're going to push that button as often as you can to get that every so often piece of candy. It is pure psychological. Do you know the Skinner box and the Skinner box mentality?
Oh, it sounds really familiar. You're talking about B.F. Skinner, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Which theory in specific?
The Skinner box in a nutshell is that he locked pigeons in just a box.
Yeah.
And he realized that, pigeons, if you just pushed the button once and you got some, some food, you would only push the buttons when you're hungry. But if you push the button and just, 1 out of 5 times you get food, you'd push that button all the time. Not necessarily because you're hungry, but because pushing the button is rewarding all of a sudden.
And that's interesting because it kind of goes in with his idea of operant conditioning techniques, where it's, you'll train them that, if you train the individual, if you get it once, they'll want to get it again and again.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, so that, yeah.
Yeah,
similar.
that's Farmville.
Yeah, absolutely.
Farmville is nothing but conditioning,
Yeah.
which is why nobody plays it anymore. But Spec Ops is definitely a narrative journey. It is not necessarily a fun game, but it is trying to make a point about something, and every little detail and everything it does is trying to work to that point. And because I only have about 50 minutes, I don't think I'll probably be able to show you just what I want to show, but it is about an 8 to 9 hour experience, about the time it would take to read a book. So I can't necessarily show the whole thing here. So beyond what Spec Ops is doing with Heart of Darkness, it's important to realize where it fits in sort of the video game ecology, because nothing is created in a vacuum, and Heart of Darkness would probably be horrible if it was created in a vacuum. Spec Ops The Line is a modern military shooter. These games are some of the most successful games of all time. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, it made some $500 million in its opening day, which is more than The Dark Knight did during its entire box office results. So in one day, it managed to beat Batman. And because of the success of the Call of Duty series and other things, every other game, is kind of a different flavor of the military shooter. You pick up the same kind of guns, you go around the same kind of story, but it's still generally all power fantasies. A character might get, shot at the end, so you kind of feel a little bad, but still you felt like a badass getting from point A to point B. And there's just miscellaneous flavors of it, the Battlefield series tends to have more vehicles. But just look at the box art for all this stuff. It's all just a guy walking with a gun. Spec Ops The Line is not necessarily a modern military shooter, and even then, look at the cover of this. It's a guy with a gun holding up. But Spec Ops is not necessarily a modern military shooter trying to be that same flavor. And I say that because some people will talk about how the development studio, Jaeger, they didn't necessarily have the budget to create like a high quality multi-million-dollar experience, although they did have some $1 million to create it, so they really try to focus on what could make a compelling experience. And because of that, people have talked about how Spec Ops: The Line kind of feels like it was made in 2007-ish, maybe 2006. And they say that because these games have developed exponentially over the last 7-8 years.
Wait, so when was this created then, if it seems like 2007?
2012.
2012?
Yeah, this came out last year. Around the summertime, I think.
And that's just, when you say that, it just means like, that it feels like 2007 in terms
of the game mechanics,
Okay.
like video games, they update annually.
Mhm.
Like Modern Warfare 2 and Call of Duty World at War came out within 1 year of each other. Battlefield Bad Company 2 and Battlefield 3, that was about 2 years. This was the sequel to Medal of Honor that came out about 2 years ago. I don't know when Arma 2 came out, this game itself isn't out at the moment.
2008.
2008, thank you.
Okay.
But no, like the Call of Duty series is annualized. Every November you will get a new Call of Duty game, and you have for probably about a decade at this point.
Yeah. Modern Warfare 3 was
No,
a 10-year anniversary.
Battlefield is about 2 years or so. So there is this history of just these annual releases, and each one plays a little better, it's a little bit more tighter, the experience is a little bit more fluid. Spec Ops isn't necessarily very fluid. And the things you do in the game, okay, you know, Modern Warfare 2 made a lot more money than Batman, but a lot of what Spec Ops is trying to do is show you just how absurd some of the things you do in these games are. Because in the military, you don't necessarily have these, you know, incredible hero moments. You have to make really tough decisions when you're, you know, running into other soldiers and shooting each other. You have to make sort of these really tight life or death moments. And with Spec Ops and what it's trying to do, almost feels like it's trying to say that not every military shooter, and the military is not just sort of this hero fantasy that everything has been. And you'll actually see, you know, conversations in the game, like near the end, which we will see, John Conrad, who's the character you've been chasing the entire game, actually says, let's face it, you came here because you wanted to be something you're not, a hero. Which is what you were doing in every other game, and you're probably doing it in this game too, trying to get your hero fantasy. But Spec Ops puts you in a situation where you have two bad options and you have to choose one of them. There is no good feeling in this game. Every moral choice you have in this game is wrong. And in most other video games with moral choices, like, it's usually presented on a dial, so there's like a yes answer and the no answer. Yes, you will, you know, go out of your way to save children, or no, you will let the children die. It's not necessarily a great storytelling tool, but it's what's been available at the moment, and it's been developing greatly over the years to make sure that these moral choices aren't so binary and yes and no. And what's great about Spec Ops is that it's not necessarily done on a dial. It's just, hey, you do something, and half the time they won't even tell you what those options are. You just have to figure something out, because that's really how life works. That is how unfortunate situations work. Additionally, the plot structure of Spec Ops does in fact use the Heart of Darkness lineup. It is about people going into a foreign country, realizing that something isn't necessarily right, and then them trying to, you know, just keep going farther and farther and farther until they find the person who can hopefully explain it. But with Spec Ops, the concept is that it's about, Spec Ops is about Marcus Walker, who's the main character, and two other members of Delta Force, that's your team, heading into Dubai after receiving a stress call from John Conrad, who is the leader of the 33rd Militia, who during this giant sandstorm decided to stay in Dubai and hopefully just help these people out. Eventually get this distress call that things have gone really, really wrong, and you're called in to try to go in and save the day. Once there, you realize that not everything is what it seems. Like the CIA is there for some reason investigating things, and you're not sure why exactly they're there. You realize that the CIA is actually fighting the 33rd Militia, so you will then spend a good portion of the game shooting other United States soldiers. And this is probably the only game where you are a US soldier fighting other US soldiers, which is definitely saying something about the way we look at games and sort of the way we even look at combat. No other developer, not even these guys in their right mind, probably would have decided that, hey, we're going to make a game where you fight other US civilians and see what happens. So this game, it definitely uses the Heart of Darkness structure to talk about two core ideas. And one is things about post-traumatic stress disorder. In the game, you will see a lot of just sort of weird flashes, the senses of madness and insanity that is going on during all this combat. And also the ethical use of white phosphorus, which was a huge deal during the Iraq War, because essentially you could instantly burn an entire village, and whether or not you should. Even though you know there are, military insurgents there and you need to take them out. You can do it relatively quickly, but is it the right thing to do? Because you are pretty much just using a computer and pushing a button, which we'll be doing very soon. And with that, this is Spec Ops. The game doesn't have a heroic feeling like other games do. It's not at all a fun game based off what you do. You're gonna feel like shit after making moral choices, and I'll be showing a few of them and probably asking what I should do. And I decided I'm gonna play just so we don't die a lot, and I know what I want to show. If not, I would probably make other people play. Okay, so let's see if the Xbox works now. Not yet. If you guys want to take a 2-minute break, go ahead.
Are we gonna have discussion?
Yeah, actually,
I'll
let's
go
start
get
discussing.
Get the evaluation sheets. You guys will go and discuss.
Okay. So there's like a lot of comparisons between video games and web specific video games. Like I keep thinking and stuff. Which is cool, but okay, you said something about how in games you progress, like
Mhm.
it gets harder and stuff, but isn't that the same for books?
Not necessarily.
But what I'm saying is you said that they make the levels harder. Well, in books, you start out at like kindergarten, you start reading like a book about a bunny, and then you progress to Heart of Darkness. Isn't that the same thing?
But when you pick up one book, when you pick up Heart of Darkness isn't going to get harder and keep you from reading the rest of Heart of
But
Darkness.
doesn't the plot, the plot structure from the author, the way that it's written, could complicate the book as you read it? Like the plot, you know what I mean? And it's obviously not equivalent to like the Heart of a Game, but at the same time, like as our plot develops in Heart of Darkness, it does become harder to keep track of things and understand what's going on, and it gets darker throughout. So that's where I see the comparison. Because by the end of the story, you're definitely at a much different place than when you started on this boat with a guy telling a story. You're at,
You're at a different place, but ultimately, like, reading the words was still a very similar experience.
But understanding them is harder.
That's sort of, yes, but the game, it's not actively trying to fight back at you.
Like, if I remember correctly, there was this one comedian who actually made a great point about it, where it was like, video games are the only medium that will punish you for not being good enough at it. Where it's like, you'll never read a book, and then halfway through a chapter, it'll just go, hey, what's the name of that one guy that was only mentioned on one page? And then if you don't answer right, bam, you're back to chapter 1. Or like, halfway through a song, it'll just go, dance enough to merit this song.
Oh, that just worked a little bit there.
Yeah.
Or it was white at least when it came
It's
out.
an interesting thing too. You mentioned, Alex, like with the psychology aspect, the operant conditioning. It's
Yeah.
like with Spec Ops, people are conditioned, like with military shooters, to go out there and cause carnage, kill others. But the problem is, like you were mentioned at the beginning of your presentation, that it's very cyclic. The routine of video games in certain aspects, like all video games are different, but in this, if, for example, military shooters, it is a cycle. They all repeat each other eventually. So it was interesting to bring in, like, how you were saying ludoliteracy, you said?
Ludoliteracy,
Oh, okay. Well,
which
it's-
isn't necessarily a commonly used term, I just really like it.
Yeah,
And
it's-
ludos is the Latin word for play.
It's interesting because like there is another like Latin phrase. It's called serio ludere, which means like playing seriousness. So in a way, like a lot of these military shooters, like what Spec Ops could be doing is like playing in seriousness. You are following the traditional aspect of other military shooters, but it's also very serious in the fact that you are going against other U.S.
Hey, Alex,
soldiers.
if you turn, there's a switch on the cord for the Xbox. If you switch from like standard to HD.
Yeah, it was switched to TV, but at this point I will play with it again.
I'm hoping this kind of develops more, but I want to talk more about the parallels between Heart of Darkness and Spec Ops.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we'll see that sort of, especially near the end, we will see sort of how it all works.
Okay, because you mentioned two things. I'm sure there's more than that, but you said there's a recurring thing of PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
Between are you insinuating that between like Marlo having it and then also the main character that you play as the agent, like what they experience through and that you engage with? Does that make sense?
Could you repeat that?
Oh, I guess like what I'm trying to, I guess I just want to go into more detail about the parallelism. And you mentioned PTSD is one thing. We never discussed that in class before, and so I guess like it sparks my interest. If you look into a psychological standpoint, if you're doing psychoanalysis as a theory for Art of Darkness, and how you can relate the two between the game and the book.
Okay.
You can do a lot of parallels. I took a class last quarter on just war literature.
Yeah, PTSD has kind of only recently been studied,
Yeah.
sort of in the last.
You also said that video games are that they respond to the player, but aren't they pre-designed?
They are
So,
designed, but
I mean, no matter what, someone still wrote it, so it's what they want you to do.
yes, but ultimately, let's take Super Mario as an example. You know, in Mario, you have your couple options. One, go from left to right to try to get to the end of the level, and then you jump on the flagpole and fireworks shoot out, you go into the castle. Or you don't always have to do that. You could also, just stand there and wait 2 minutes and then die. Or you could go a little bit, jump and fall into a pit and die. Or you could try to,
still die because they want you to die.
But yes, there are limits to the human imagination. Like let's take Loneliness. That game is not necessarily made with a win condition. It's just made with a keep playing till it's over kind of condition. But the way Audra played it is definitely different than the way I played it. And I made Leah play it a week ago, and she kind of did some similar things, but had different revelations later. She was actually more mad at the figures for walking away.
But that's the same thing as reading a book. Everyone reads the book differently.
Yeah,
There
Yeah.
are different interpretations, but ultimately, the story isn't responding to your actions the way that they do in games.
And that's why I got sad.
Go ahead.
Oh, that's why I was getting sad. I was like, why can't I and I was just moving along, doing nothing, and then I go to these little figures and they just disappear and evaporate, and then it's getting darker and darker, and the music just gets more somber, and I'm just like, why am I playing this?
What does that say about? That's what I was learning just to think about, because you said that books are not interactive.
Yeah.
Then what does that say about our reader response area? Because I understand that you can't change the text,
That's my student.
but with the connection to it, the book could be different depending on how each different person reads it, and therefore the experience changes.
That is true, but the text itself doesn't change. We can engage with it, and that's what I would argue.
Yeah.
Engagement with the
Let
text.
me add to. I think if you combine what Brianna and what Kim were saying, you will have an interesting picture. Because even in that game, what is it about? A game about compliance.
Yeah, training.
They offer you a hammer to smash the window panes, but most people don't do that. But what if I pick up the hammer and smash the whole game? That would be against the rule. So they give you a certain amount of freedom to do things, but not totally free. So it's interactive, or it's an illusion of being interactive. You're still under a lot of control. Yeah, please.
Well, aren't you also under control when you're reading a text?
Yes.
You're under,
Yes.
you have
That authorial guidance, remember?
Yeah. Authority, yeah.
Okay, but it kind of reminds me, the difference I see it as is if you're reading a book that says, okay, this is chapter 1. Now you have an option. Do you want to go to chapter 2A or 2B?
Yeah.
And then that's kind of how
We do have books
Yeah.
like that.
Right,
Yeah.
and then from there, you
What if
choose-
I say I want to go to chapter 2Z? They don't have one.
Well, yes, but you still have an option.
Yeah.
Still, you can change how the story progresses, and somehow everything links together. But the choices that you make for each chapter will change the overarching story.
Mhm.
So they can all be linked together somehow, but the overarching story is going to change depending on what you choose each time. And so
Yeah.
that's how normal books don't function that way, because no matter what the text is set, you will go from chapter 1 to chapter 2 because that's how the book progresses.
Yes.
Unless you're like me and you look at the end.
Yeah.
Not from the end.
And I would argue that yes, it is somewhat interactive. It's not great interaction, because ultimately the book itself is not responding. It is all generally predetermined.
Right, yeah.
And then we're just arguing good AI versus bad AI at that point.
Yeah.
Because what AI should be doing and artificial intelligence in gaming should be doing is not necessarily trying to kill you, but trying to make you win slowly.
Yeah.
With choose your own adventures, there's really nothing stopping you from just flipping back and choosing another answer.
So if
There's no agency in that world because it's a book.
You also said something about the Odyssey, and you said that they didn't want it to progress orally, and I just wanted to like clarify that he didn't want it to progress orally because orally changes.
Yeah, because it changes the text, and Plato had issues with that.
Audra, kind of going back to what you asked, you want to talk more about connections between the game and the book, and I think we'll get more after he plays, but also one thing that he mentioned was that how different this game is because it has US attacking, other US, and that kind of relates to there's like the defamiliarization of the death in the book as well, because we're looking at it in a different way. In most games we're attacking, a different enemy, but in this way we're looking at it different because we're attacking our own, which is like a tactic used.
Why is it wrong to attack our own? Well, it is not wrong to attack some people who are not our own.
Right.
Yeah, so it makes you ask that question.
Yeah.
If you remember the Freudian theory, this is in response to Janae's comment. If you look at Freudian theory, the greatest game actually is the game of writing, because you will decide chapter 2A, 2B, 2C. You just
Well,
interrogate.
that's the game of an author.
Yes.
And authorship and playership
Yeah.
kind of are a handshake, but it is a different thing.
Yeah.
Because in one, everything is coming out of your mind. The other
Yeah.
thing is still responding to tools that you are given.
Next question: does the author have total freedom of creativity?
He's still limited to the form.
Exactly. The code. Remember Jacobson? You have to write within this code. Outside of this code, it's meaningless. The people can't make sense of it.
Aren't video games made with code?
They are made with code.
Yes.
But-
indeed.
So structurally, like they're both made with the same.
They are both, sort of authored in similar ways, except one is waiting for the reader to actively engage, or to actively kind of respond to it in sort of a conversation, which is why interactivity is listening, thinking, and responding. Versus a book which has done all the thinking and responding it wants to do and will just sit there.
What is
Well-
the technical difficulty with this?
Video. I have audio.
Oh.
So I have 3 different video cables and adapters and none of them want to work.
Well, technically, as in response to Alex's last comments, if a book is already sitting there, already decided what's going to happen. I mean, until somebody actually plays a video game or reads a book, who knows?
Yes.
I mean, how do you,
Yes.
it's
That-
just-
Yeah, that reader response is there in games, but ultimately, the outcome of the text itself differs from player to player.
Exactly,
I
yeah.
guess that's,
That's
the
same with
easiest
video.
example is sort of Star Wars video games that have come out since about 2002, and they are started to kind of play with this idea of moral choice. So depending on your actions in the game, you will either get, join the light side and be, a Jedi Knight, or join the dark side and be a Sith warrior. And sort of based off of that, a lot of things happen. Like if you decide to go bad guy, you can command your Wookiee buddy to kill his best friend, and that's totally okay. Well, that would not happen at all in the good guy campaign. So you will have conversations with people being like, so where were you when, Tali died in Mass Effect? And somebody else will be like, what? That didn't happen. And just have this massively different experience with the same text in the storytelling process, not necessarily in the reader response process. I have no idea what's going on with that. Spec Ops party at my house?
Do you want me to go see if there's anybody in the other classroom?
At this point,
You have an HDMI cable with you? Because I see a spot where, if we can somehow jerry-rig it, if we get the Xbox side up, we can.
I could just try to plug it in up there.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
You can hold it up.
Oh, why don't you go to the APUS people?
Well, see, I am the ATUS people, which is
You are? Interesting.
That's where I work.
Oh, you work there?
Yeah, I work at ATUS.
So, okay. So let me ask you, maybe we ask you more questions.
Yeah, let's ask more questions and I'll see what I
You
can
talk
pull up.
about game criticism.
Yes.
Well, are there journals or what kind of medium do we have for game criticism?
A lot of games criticism is the product of the internet
Oh, okay.
because that's just sort of
Kill
where
Streak.
everything prospered. This is probably one of the more recently prominent ones. Kill Screen Magazine. Gama Sutra does some great criticism. It's also on news. And then there's definitely the academic field of everything,
Uh-huh.
because every industry needs academia.
Uh-huh.
So, sort of the top schools are, Ian Bogost at Georgia Tech. He's written countless books at this point, sort of covering, an approach to video game criticism
Yeah.
and the expressive power of video games. And he is definitely a huge kind of factor in sort of the academic world. He also created something called Cow Clicker, which I can talk about because we were talking about Farmville earlier. But Cow Clicker is probably one of the finest works of video game satire at the moment, in that you have Farmville, which is a game ultimately about building these giant grand farms and sort of paying money to build your farms faster. That's sort of the lucrative structure of the game,
Mm-hmm.
is that you can build this and wait 5 minutes to harvest your strawberries, and the bigger items like wait 5 days you can harvest this, or you can pay us $3 and you can do it tomorrow.
Uh-huh.
And it's made a lot of money. Although, like Zynga the company that made Farmville actually just fired 500 people, and they're still doing great, but not as well as they were 3 years ago. Cow Clicker was a game just to show you how silly the interaction was in that space, where just every 5 minutes you're allowed to click on a cow. It was great. They had the slogans, why drive a car when you can click a cow? And then and even then you could just buy different outfits for your cow and stuff for no reason. But people spent money on it, and the creator was like, dude, you're not actually supposed to play Cow Clicker, you're clicking on a cow. That is not a meaningful interaction.
Uh-huh.
And that's sort of, as literary students, that's probably one of the more important things to think about, is that how exactly is your interaction in this space meaningful? And we've kind of talked about that a little bit, sort of as I was describing Mario and stuff, what exactly makes your time in this space meaningful? Is it just by the blindly clicking, or is it by having to make a very, very impossible moral choice? Like in Spec Ops The Line, which I wish I could show you, there's a part where Conrad essentially has two people strung up, just dangling, and you have to decide who lives. One guy is a man who stole water to feed his family and got caught, which is against the law. And the other guy accidentally shot a civilian, is a soldier who shot a civilian trying to apprehend this guy. Both things are against the law. You get to choose who wins or loses, who lives or dies in that situation. And it's really hard. And turns out it's all a post-traumatic stress disorder fantasy. But until you realize that, it really does make you think what is the right thing to do and what is the wrong thing to do. And one of the most important things I think Spec Ops does in sort of the ethical question of white phosphorus is it actually gives you a choice where you actually have no proper choice. Like I talked about how you'll have two options and both of them are bad. This is, you have one real option and one fake option, and the option is actually to use white phosphorus. I really wish the game works, but as you're doing it, you have this computer screen and you're kind of moving the reticle around. I don't want to YouTube it.
Okay.
And you have the reticle, and as you're just filling the screen with white phosphorus and watching, just sort of heat vision, people just dying and disappearing, your face reflects more on the screen as the game is going on to kind of show the inhumanity of what you're doing. And you end up realizing you killed 50-something civilians. And there's just this shot of this ashen body of this woman holding a child, and you just stare at it. And you realize that you just pushed a button on a screen, and you just ended a lot of lives.
Is it interesting, that Spec Ops, when you were mentioning all those different scenes, is that sort of like how we were discussing deconstruction, essentially? Because deconstructing actions of the military in different areas of the
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Actually, yeah, it's definitely deconstructing sort of the ideas and sort of that center of what the modern military shooter is.
Yeah, I'm gonna go off that idea. I don't know if anyone's read Ender's Game, but the main character, I forget his name, but he actually.
Isn't it Ender?
Ender, yeah. Yeah, he ends up, they make him play a game within the book that you're reading, and he actually is unaware, but when he's playing this game and stuff and he finally defeats it, he thinks it's a simulation, but what in reality what they have done is they've taken the simulation and they put it in real life, and what he was actually doing in the game happened in his storybook, and his plot and figures. So that just kind of makes you wonder what we could go with that later in life, in reality.
In some cases, the military using some simulations and drone warfare is pretty much pushing a button to the point that you could almost argue that is happening.
That is happening.
That's an ethics class, but it is happening.
Yeah, Okay, so you mentioned power fantasies, so
Mhm.
if we looked at it from Kirk's perspective, is that what it would be classified as?
In many cases, I see what Kurtz was doing as a
Kurtz
power
is-
fantasy, and that he was able to go in and kind of take over, and he was the, Africa, F yeah kind of story.
Okay, so if we look at it from Marlowe's perspective, what would it be?
He comes in looking for the power fantasy, and he ends up realizing that there was no power to be had.
And that's where the PTSD comes in, and the madness. Just
Yeah, and it was the
invokes.
trauma of the
It's just
entire
the
event,
trauma.
is that you ended up doing a lot of bad things, thinking you were trying to be a hero, and turns out you weren't doing much to save anything.
The symbolism for Heart of Darkness too.
Yeah, which is why, this game, it is delightful that they've been very open about it. And I wish that, at the Game Developers Conference this year, which I was at, but I didn't have a pass to actually get me into this talk, was actually the narrative designers of this game kind of talking about how they developed the story. And apparently it focuses a lot on Marxist ideas. And they really, made a game kind of focused on Marxism. And I really wish I could explain why and how, but I can't. Because I don't have $500 to buy me an online pass to see this thing.
Something that came up for me was you were talking about how video games, they need to be engaging. So I was kind of wondering, what are the techniques that they used in this game to make it engaging, and how do those relate to the things that Joseph Conrad did to make his book engaging for us? Because obviously you said both are not fun. So
Yeah.
why would we want to? Why do we read Heart of Darkness, and why would we pick up this game that has the same morbid?
I would say it's sort of the plot focus, which says, hey, you need to go over there, followed by the feeling of being unsettled. Just that air of mystery. Because to me, that's really what pulls Heart of Darkness along quickly, is, people measuring your head, saying, it's what's inside that gets bigger than their actual skulls. And kind of just these, have you met Kurtz? Have you seen him? Sort of that urge to keep going forward. And quickly in this game, you learn that something is not right. And so the game is, something's not right, we need to go see Conrad. And so they will then spend the game pretty much doing that until the main character sort of starts hearing a broken walkie-talkie who he thinks is Conrad, and he just starts blaming everything bad that has happened in this game on Conrad, to the point that he's got this two-faced nature. And at one point his face gets scarred, so he actually has a full-on two-face thing going on, to show sort of his dualistic nature that is happening. As he's just, Conrad has done it all, we need to kill that bastard. And what's even fantastic, I'm actually going to see if I can show some of these, is that the game, even when you're not playing it, is still actively narrating the theming of everything. In the loading screens, when you're going from one level to another, or when you died and the game is reloading, it'll tell you, sort of advice such as, hold the A button to crouch and, duck for cover. And, if you hold the, the left stick, you can, or if you just push the right stick and cover, you'll blind shoot. If you want to, focus, you can, hit the left trigger to kind of go over your cover and shoot your guns. But later on,
shoot?
yeah,
What is
hold your
blind
shoot and then shoot the gun, just on the controller. It'll tell you, kind of tips on how to do things in the game, and what buttons to push to kind of, make it an easier experience for you. And it'll just kind of give you advice on how to play the game. Because it's a loading screen, you're just kind of sitting there looking at a picture. But the more, ethical, questionable things you do, the game starts directly asking you, the player, questions. After a while, the game itself starts, posting things, it'll just, as the game is loading, it'll just say, you're still a good person. Almost as a reminder that you're trying to convince yourself that what you did is not there. Can you even remember why you came here? And the game is asking, about halfway through, why are you still playing this thing? This is a horrible thing that you are doing as a character, and you, the player, are responsible. I haven't seen that one. Later on, it says, it's all your fault. And do you feel like a hero yet? Because what you're doing is not at all heroic. And that's a very interesting take on video games. One thing,
Was this game very successful?
critically, yes. Financially, it did all right.
Because I'm just wondering if it's telling you that, I don't think, after you're telling me, I don't think I'd ever want to play.
And that's,
because you're telling, just
I think this game deserves $60 more than most. But like I said, people play video games to feel good about themselves. It is a power fantasy. It feels good. It's escapism. Games could do more than that, but it's definitely hard to spend $60 on it.
They can lead to addiction also.
That's questionable. Sort of the, actually, a friend of mine actually wrote a book on game addiction. You can get it at the library. And he sort of argues yes, but no. There is sort of the gambling sensation, but you're not necessarily losing any, or you're not necessarily gaining dependency on the substance, except for just Skinner box philosophies, essentially, which can happen with anything. And also, video games don't necessarily lead to violence, which I'll just segue that into, is that there are signs that you'll become more aggressive with video games, but really those studies are poorly done, and you get the same feeling just from like dirt bike racing.
Isn't the counter argument that it's a form of catharsis?
And there is some catharsis, which I've said power fantasies. Like it does feel good, but it doesn't necessarily lead to real life violence.
Right.
In fiction, there is always a moment of epiphany. There's, if you're a good round character, you realize it's something. Technically, it is called the pivot illumination.
Mhm.
It's the pivot moment, and then you realize, you learn something that's the character change.
Yeah.
In games, is that element in there?
I'm going to use Spec Ops as an example, and yes, that epiphany does happen in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Spec Ops is actually fantastic in that you as a player kind of have 3 different choices on how to deal with your epiphany. Because once you get to the last second, you actually meet Conrad, who is dead. He's been dead pretty much the whole game.
Yeah.
And what you've been seeing, hearing, and talking to is kind of just a mental fantasy of yourself. So you have sort of this mental image of Conrad, and he's talking to you, and he says, none of this was real. This was really all you the whole time. Like, you killed all but, say, 12 members of this U.S. Army. Do you feel good? How can you live with yourself? And he says, one of us has to live, and he points a gun at you. And you point your gun back. And so you all of a sudden have this moment, he says, like, I'm going to count to 5. And even then you're just talking about how this is not real, this is all just fucking bullshit. But now you as a player have the choice to pull the trigger and kill Conrad, or let him shoot you. The first time I played, like, I had no idea how to really react to the situation. Like, I was told that throughout the entire game, what I was doing led to nothing. But I can still fight back at this point. And I've pretty much been fighting back the entire game because that's what you're supposed to do. But now you have the option of like sort of a simple way to end this thing. And so I chose the simple way to end it. What you then can do at the ending, and I really wish I could show you, is once you kill Conrad, you then like make a message to the US military to like get an emergency evacuation for yourself in Dubai. Death toll 1 too few, meaning that you feel like you died yourself. And then after the credits roll, the game actually continues. Because you have your credit roll, and you have Walker, the main character, just sort of sitting, he's now wearing like Conrad's clothes, like just to show that he's almost become Conrad at this point, which we can also see as Heart of Darkness symbolism.
Or Apocalypse Now.
Yeah, or Apocalypse Now. And, like military soldiers come up, and you actually like carry a gun, and the other soldiers are like, hey, it's just shaken up, give me the gun, we'll take you home. And again, you have another option. Do you start shooting more US soldiers, or do you actually give in? And that is, once again, another option. You can then start shooting every US soldier on the screen. These guys have not been to Dubai, they came there to pick you up. But still, like, in your sense of shakenness, you have the option of still just kind of going into that madness, into that Heart of Darkness.
That's so Rambo.
Except it's not as fun. Because Rambo has, good catharsis and power fantasy elements. Like, everybody wants to be Rambo, he's awesome.
Sylvester Stallone portrays PTSD.
Yeah. But you can also then start shooting them, or kind of give in. And when they do give in, they say, what happened? Or, do you remember what they say? Because Sean played it too.
They ask is like, how did you live through this? And then he says, who says I did?
That's what it is. Yeah. Last night when I played it, that was the ending I chose not to go with.
Well, thank you. We need to stop.